right, well, it is 11 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Please let me know if you can't hear me quite as well. I'm in a hotel room and there's some noise outside, but hopefully you can't hear that. Uh, so, uh, what I told the people who were on just a little bit early is I'm here in Wichita, going to be at a booth at the League of Kansas Municipalities. So a little different setup for me. So if things don't go as planned, maybe you'll give me a little grace for that. So today we're going to talk about public rights-of-way accessibility guidelines, PROWAG. I would hope that if anybody has comments or questions throughout this hour, that you feel free to unmute anytime and join in the conversation. That's the intent of the Roundabout, is not so much just me talking, but to have a conversation. That's what the Roundabout part is. Hopefully more like a roundtable discussion. I'm going to start out with just some basics. Hopefully won't take the whole hour. So there is time for questions, but hopefully as we go along, again, feel free to jump in, and that's how this, I think, will be most useful to others, if they can hear how people are actually applying and struggling through the different topics that we're discussing. So, PROWAG, I'm hoping that you've at least heard of PROWAG, but I'm going to go over that anyway. So PROWAG stands for Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines. So public. Remember, this is about people. That's kind of the whole point of this, is that, sorry, with this one screen, all of our participants are blocking my notes. Just one moment. Just my notes. All right. So public right-of-way is, uh-oh, did you lose my screen?
No, we still see it.
Okay. There it is. Okay, it's like, but I don't see it. All right. So public rights-of-way that's dedicated to transportation purposes, that's a legally established right for use by the public. Though for right-of-way, though we often think about just ramps, it's really any pedestrian pathway for pedestrians. Now, pedestrian could be walking or using a wheelchair or other mobility device. They may be on skates or a skateboard. ADA really was focused on buildings, even though we kind of use those same guidelines for sidewalks and ramps and things. The ADA was initially intended just for buildings, so that's why PROAG was even developed. So it's sidewalks, streets, crosswalks, curb ramps. It talks about some like parallel parking. We're not really going to get into that today. It also covers shared use paths. We'll touch on that just a little bit. Then we do accessibility. So providing access, really eliminating barriers for anyone to use our facilities. And these are guidelines, yes, but they are eventually being incorporated into things like the MUTCD, which makes them more of a requirement than just a guideline. The final rule was published in the Federal Register on August 3rd of 2023. That was when the Access Board finally said, yes, we're ready for this. There is a notice of proposed rulemaking, I think was finished from the Department of Transportation that applies to new or alterations made to transit stops within the right-of-way. The other aspects of PROWAG related to any kind of traffic control devices have to be adopted by the U.S. Department of Justice. Before then, Federal Highways can start the rulemaking process to update the MUTCD. So that's because DOT only has independent authority under the ADA for transit facilities for whatever reason. Others, the Department of Justice has the authority for. So any questions about any of that? So it applies to both permanent and temporary pedestrian facilities and elements in the public right-of-way. If a pedestrian circulation path or transit stop is temporarily closed, we have to provide an alternate route. And just in general, if compliance is technically infeasible for things like the terrain or like a historic or natural feature, you still have to comply to the maximum extent feasible. And that's really what we're supposed to be following anyway, whether PROWAG ever gets adopted or not. We need to provide access to the maximum extent feasible. And then again, in a temporary situation, another option is to provide some sort of alternate means for access for persons with disabilities. All right. Now let's get to some more definitions. There's a lot of, there's definitions though. I think anytime you have a new topic, you have to everybody be on the same page of what we're talking about. So a pedestrian access route is discussed a lot. So in this case, this whole area is a pedestrian area in general. I mean, you and I could walk right up to the building or around a planter or whatever. But if we have some sort of disability, those areas may be off limits to us just because of our limitations. However, as public entities, we need to provide access routes that are accessible to everyone. The PROWAG says that there has to be a 48-inch minimum pedestrian access route that is free and clear of all this other stuff that might be out there. If it happens to be right up against, I mean, if we didn't have these trees and things, then that 48 inches does not include the curb. So starting from the back of the curb, if you have nothing in the way, you have to have at least 48 inches. Now, skip ahead just a moment here. If you have a pedestrian refuge island or a median, now the difference being a median, you're just crossing through. A refuge island needs to have some space to stop. And if it's signalized and you don't have enough time to go the whole way, there would be some pedestrian push buttons to finish that But anyway, that opening has to be at least 60 inches or at least as wide as the crosswalk itself. So if you have an 8-foot crosswalk, it has to be 8 feet. If it's 6 feet, I mean, but if it's that 4 feet, you still have to have a 6-foot opening. I'm sorry, 5-foot opening for the pedestrian refuge island. If you have a shared use path and you put bollards in to restrict so motor vehicle traffic can't get through, again, still has to be a 48-inch opening to allow people to pass through there. Now, here's another thing. So if the pedestrian access route is less than 60 inches, so if you're just stuck with that 48 inches, then every 200 feet, you need to have a passing area that's at least 60 by 60. So to me, what that really means, I mean, I think that would be kind of silly. I don't know, whatever works for your situation, but my recommendation would be to stick with a minimum of a 5-foot path, just so you don't have to worry about those turnaround spaces. So here's just a different depiction of that. Again, this kind of blue area here would be your pedestrian access route. I tried to make my cursor bigger so you could see it since I'm pointing to things. So next we're going to talk about the grade. And grade, again, is along the route itself. So as long as you're within the highway right-of-way, it cannot exceed 5 feet, 5% grade. However, if the street itself is steeper than that, then it can't be steeper as long as it doesn't exceed the grade of the street itself. Now, if you're not within the highway right-of-way in some sort of a, like maybe a pedestrian mall or something, then that 5% is the controlling factor. If it's within a crosswalk, again, you have that 5% max, except if there's super elevation on the roadway, then you don't have to get rid of the super elevation. It can be the same as the super elevation there. Then cross slope. So that's going the other way. Generally, that would be for drainage, why you would have some sort of a cross slope. If it's not within the crosswalk, that cross slope can be no more than 2.1%, which is 1 to 48. Even though this isn't ADA, a lot of what is done, what the Access Board does is based on more of an architecture type thing, and they do percentages. I mean, they do ratios like that. So 1 to 48 for this cross slope. And part of that is if it gets steeper than that, and especially if you're in a wheelchair, it takes a lot of work to fight against that cross slope. So again, if you have parallel on-street parking, there's different rules for that. If you're in a crosswalk, it depends on the type of control that you have at that intersection or that crosswalk. If it's a yield or stop controlled, so the vehicle has to stop, or if you're there, then that maximum 2.1% continues. However, if it's uncontrolled, so the vehicles can just go through generally without having to stop, or if there's a signal or a pedestrian hybrid beacon, those have a 5% max. And then for mid-block crossings or a roundabout, that cross slope cannot exceed the the grade of the street. Any questions about any of that? All right. Surfaces need to be stable, firm, and slip resistant. Grade brakes shall be flush. Then we'll get into changes in level. So you are allowed to have a vertical change in level, but only if it is 1/4 of an inch or less. Anything over 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch can be beveled. I've seen a lot of sidewalks that have been beveled just with like a concrete mill type thing. And that ratio can't be steeper than 1 to 2. If it's over a 1/2 an inch, then that's max slope is 1 to 12, and that goes up to 6 inches. So you can have a 6-inch change in level as long as it's beveled at 1 to 12. If it's over 6 inches, then you need to treat it like a ramp, and we'll talk about ramps in a little bit. So that's vertical. If you have horizontal openings, picture a grate in the sidewalk. It shall not allow the passage of a sphere larger than a 1/2 an inch. So if you're wearing high heels or something, they don't get stuck down in there. There are also regulations related to pedestrian at grade rail crossings. I'm not going into those today, but know that they are there. So alternate pedestrian access routes. Again, generally, this would be while you're doing some construction on a sidewalk or an intersection. Signs. You're not supposed to just put a sign. I mean, first of all, you have to tell the people. You can't just put up a barrier. You need to put up a sign that's in advance of the decision point. So if you get to where you're closing the sidewalk and there's no other way to go other than turning around, you need to have a sign in advance of that decision point so they can choose to go a different route. And that sign obviously needs to tell them where the detour or the alternate pedestrian access route is. Here's the more challenging part, is that it calls for also having proximity actuated audible signs or other non-visual means for people who obviously can't see as well. So that's going to be tricky. Proximity actuated, obviously, if they don't know to look for a push button or something, you can't just have a push button actuated. It has to be something that notices, that actuates to know when someone's in the area. So that's kind of a tricky one. I'm sure there's devices out there that you can purchase for that. We had a project once that I was managing when I was in local projects, and it was just like, I don't know, it was supposed to be proximity actuated, but it was just going all the time to say detour route. I don't remember. It's been a while ago. I don't remember what the words were, but it was going all the time just on a barricade at that decision point. And there were, I believe, some complaints from local property owners because they were hearing that all the time. So it's supposed to be actuated by someone actually being there, the presence of someone. Surface, it needs to be just as accessible as the surface of whatever route was closed. the width, again, a minimum of 48 inches. But if the temporarily closed path was wider than that, then it needs to be no narrower than the path that was closed. Curb ramped or blended transitions, those have the same requirements as in the permanent situation, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Detectable edging of channelizing devices shall be provided throughout the length of the route, except where pedestrians or vehicles turn or cross, so gaps are okay there. So the top of those is no lower than 32 inches above the walking surface and free of sharp or abrasive surfaces. The bottom is a maximum of 2 inches above the walking surface. So that's so that cane can detect it. And then pedestrian signal heads, we need to have push buttons or passive detection devices along that alternate access route as well when needed. Now let's go to any questions. Again, speak up, talk over me. I don't care.
I've got one question, and I came a little bit late. You just said the pedestrian signal heads are required when needed. Are they just always needed if there's a signal there?
Yes, if you've got a detoured pedestrian route and there weren't pedestrian signal heads, but now you have enough. You have pedestrians crossing there, then yes, you would need signals associated with that signal. Yeah. Okay, curb ramps. I'm going to start with perpendicular. Again, definitions. I always have to think about what they're talking about, so I figured this would help. Perpendicular is perpendicular. The ramp is perpendicular to the sidewalk. Requirements, the running slope, another definition. Running, I'm going to think about it as the running slope is going to be running in the direction that we're going. So in this case, we're talking about the ramp itself. So this slope in this direction, perpendicular to the curb or the gutter, grade break, has a maximum of 8.3%. The cross slope on that ramp, again, is at 2.1% max. Grade breaks are not permitted. The clear area is kind of down at the bottom of the ramp, has to be 48 by 48 inches, wholly outside the vehicle travel lanes. That running slope shall be 5% max. The landing up here at the top, again, 48 by 48 inches minimum. These side treatments flared at 10%, 1 to 10 maximum. That's assuming that that's really to avoid a tripping hazard. So this is really, to me, your pedestrian access route. You may have sidewalk or something else here that people are walking, and that's why that flare needs to be 10% maximum, so it's not a tripping hazard. If this is a more of a grassy area or something that is prohibiting people from walking there, you can have more of a vertical edge there. Then parallel. So this is really where you have more limited right of way, and that ramp is really kind of becomes part of the sidewalk. So again, the running slope in this case is going to be parallel to the curb. And that's a maximum of 8.3%. But if you need more than 15 feet to achieve that 8.3%, if that ramp needs to be so long, they said it doesn't have to be any longer than 15 feet. So that might mean a greater slope to get down there. But we can do that. The most that you need that ramp to be is 15 feet. And again, the cross slope is at maximum 2.1%. Grade breaks, again, not permitted. Same landing at the bottom. Okay. Then blended transitions. These are not necessarily recommended, but I think they recognize that there are places where they are necessary. So the reason they're not recommended is because someone walking along the sidewalk kind of expects to keep going, and it kind of diverts them out of their out of their path, and then kind of sends them out into the middle of the intersection instead of along the crosswalk, where you really want them to be. But if you have a blended transition, again, running slope maximum of 5%, cross slope equal to or less than the slope of the crosswalk. The bypass is going to be up in this area. Let me make sure I don't have another. No. So if you are not crossing the street, you're going around, would be the bypass. Says where a blended transition serving more than one pedestrian circulation path has a running slope greater than 2.1%, pedestrian access route shall be provided so that a pedestrian not crossing the street may bypass the blended transition. So if you can't get a 2.1% here, then you need to provide some additional space that does meet that 2.1%, so that pedestrians don't have to slope down on that blended transition. Some common requirements of curb ramps and blended transitions. The width, again, 48 inches minimum on shared use paths. The curb ramp needs to be the same, or I'm sorry, shall be equal to the width of the shared use path. Change of grade, not exceeding 13.3%. Or a transitional space shall be provided which extends 24 inches minimum with a running slope of 2.1% maximum. Crosswalks, perpendicular curb ramp runs, parallel curb ramp landings, and 48-inch minimum width of blended transitions shall be contained wholly within the width of the sidewalks they serve. All right, detectable warning surfaces, the truncated domes. They need to be in a square or radial grid pattern. I'll go over these, I guess. The base diameter has to be 0.9 inches minimum and 1.4 inches maximum. So inch and a quarter, I guess. The top diameter is 50% of the base diameter and minimum, and 65% maximum. The height is 0.2 inches. And if you need to cut a dome, cut the detectable warning surface, partial domes are permitted along those cut edges. I think there was a time when they were not. Dome spacing, center to center is 1.6 inches minimum and 2.4 inches maximum. That's center to center. The base to base is 0.65 inches minimum. And there's some exceptions when you have to cut. Contrast shall contrast visually with the adjacent walking surfaces, either light on dark or dark on light, kind of what you're seeing here. But anyway, it needs to stand out. So especially people with limited visibility can see where that detectable warning surface is. Minimum of 24 inches in the direction of the pedestrian travel. So that's this, again, make sure I don't have yeah, here we go. A minimum of 24 inches in the direction of travel. And it needs to be the full width of the curb ramp run on curb ramps and blended transitions. At pedestrian refuge islands, again, same thing, the full width of the opening. And at pedestrian at-grade rail crossings not within the street, the full width of the path. So location. For perpendicular or your typical curb ramps, no greater than 6 inches from the edge of the pavement. On parallel, it needs to be on the landing at either the back of the curb or the edge of the pavement where there is no curb. Blended transitions. On the blended transition so that both front corners of the detectable warning surface are at the back of the curb or no greater than 6 inches from the edge of the pavement if there isn't any curb. For pedestrian refuge islands, no greater than 6 inches from the edges of the island or at the back of the curb. And in that case, it needs to be in a pedestrian refuge island. I think I have a picture of that. I did earlier. Well, we can kind of pretend this is a pedestrian refuge island. It really isn't, but that's not really what we're showing. But there needs to be at least 24 inches separating those two detectable warning surfaces. Otherwise, it's not considered a refuge island. It's considered a median. Let's see. Driveways controlled with stop or yield or traffic signals. You need to have the detectable surface on the pedestrian circulation path where it meets the driveway. If they are not controlled by stop or yield signs, then you don't have to have detectable surfaces. Now, the issue I heard of just recently is when you get a new development and they say, no, we're not going to put in stop signs. I mean, that we're not intending to. And so, okay, you don't need detectable warning. But if traffic increases on that driveway to the point where a stop sign becomes necessary, who has to install that? So think about something to think about. Then roundabouts. You should not use a detectable warning surface as the edge of the roundabout. So again, these aren't great pictures. I was kind of in a hurry, but so you don't want to put detectable edging all around to, I mean, some people might think to do that to warn people not to walk into the street, but that's not the intent of this. The intent is to say you are crossing this. I mean, you are entering the crosswalk here. And so there really needs to be a strip of grass or something in between, or a barrier of some sort to keep pedestrians from walking into any area other than the crosswalk itself. Just cover that. So where pedestrian crossing is not intended, a curb attached pedestrian circulation path shall have a continuous lost my spot here. Continuous and detectable vertical edge treatment along the street side of the path from crosswalk to crosswalk. And the bottom edge shall be at least 15 inches, or at most 15 inches above the path. So something more of a barrier to indicate don't go that way. At the crosswalk, at each multi-lane signal, if you have a multi-lane segment of your roundabout, the crosswalk shall have a signal with a pedestrian signal head, a pedestrian hybrid beacon, an RRFB, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, or a raised crossing. So some higher level treatment if you have a multi-lane crossing. And the same thing with channelized turn lanes. Multi-lane channelized turn lane shall provide a signal with a pedestrian signal head, a pedestrian hybrid beacon, an RRFB, or a raised crossing. If you have, again, that's for a channelized turn lane. Signals. All right. So first of all, we're going to talk about pedestrian signal phase timing. That should be based on a pedestrian clearance time calculated using a pedestrian walking speed of 3.5 feet per second or less. I would recommend that think about what type of users you have in the area. If you have some slower users, whether that's elderly or maybe even in a school crossing or pedestrian crossing where there's people trying to herd younger children, they may not walk so fast. So think about what speed that you use to calculate that, but no greater than 3.5 feet per second. And that goes from the pedestrian push button to either a pedestrian refuge island or the far side of the traveled way. I know when I first started designing traffic signals back in late 80s, early 90s, we would calculate to the middle of the farthest traffic lane, thinking that that last little bit would be covered somehow. But now they're saying to get to the far side of the traveled way. It needs to be at least 7 seconds. And if you're just going to calculate that time just to get to a refuge island, then you need to make sure that you have that additional pedestrian push button located in the island. An accessible walk indication shall have the same duration as the walk interval. So location, that's kind of what I put a picture here. Pedestrian push buttons shall be located no greater than 5 feet from the side of a curb, ramp, run, or the edge of the farthest associated crosswalk line from the center of the intersection. They shall be located 1.5 to 10 feet from the edge of the curb or pavement. If you have 2 push buttons on the same corner, they need to be at least 10 feet apart. And if you are doing an alteration that makes it technically infeasible, you need to provide an information sign or an information message. The face of the push button shall be parallel to its associated crosswalk. Audible and vibrotactile walk indication for pedestrian activated warning devices without a walk indication. In other words, an RRFB type. Push button shall activate a speech message that indicates the status of the beacon. It shall not include vibrotactile features indicating a walk interval. So you don't say walk light is on, like you might say at a traffic signal. You can say that the lights, the beacons have been actuated or something like that. Locator tone. Locator tone shall have a duration of 0.15 seconds or less and repeat at 1 second intervals unless there's another active audible indication from the same device, and then you need to silence it. And there's guidelines about how audible it needs to be. I'm not going to go into all of those. Because there's a lot of details about how loud it needs to be. And if you have other things going on, then you need to increase the volume and all that. Now, if the signals are in flashing mode, the locator tone shall remain active and the push buttons shall activate a speech message that communicates the operating mode of the signal. So just because you can't see doesn't mean that you don't need to know what's going on with the signals. And I would think that would be a kind of a confusing, if you know there's a signal there and you've used it a lot, why am I hearing vehicles going at different times? So that push button should say, it's in an all-way flash or something. Pedestrian push button shall have a tactile arrow with high visual contrast that is aligned parallel to the direction of travel for each of the associated crosswalks. The audible and vibrotactile walk indications are during the walk interval only. During the pedestrian change interval, the signal shall revert to push button locator tone. And the audible walk indications, where there's two push buttons 10 feet or more apart, you can use a percussive tone. And where you can't provide that 10 foot of separation, you use a speech walk message. Basically, wait, like wait to cross Broadway at Grand, something like that. And then during the pedestrian phase, it starts with the name of the street. So Broadway, walk sign is on to cross Broadway. And if it's an exclusive pedestrian phasing, it says something like walk sign is on for all crossings. And so again, this is kind of a picture of why we want to make it accessible, because even though you can have a push button, but if the person can't reach it, then it doesn't do anyone a whole lot of good. And I think in this case, even a sighted person, a perfectly healthy person might trip getting to that push button itself. A few more examples of those push buttons. This one is one where you actually wave your hand in front of it to actuate it as another option. I don't know if I've seen any of those in Kansas. Most of them are more like this first option. Then just a few other things. Any more questions that I can try to answer? All right, protruding objects in vertical clearance. If it's more than 27 inches and less than 80 inches above the walking surface, then it can't protrude out horizontally more than 4 inches. I mean, if it's a handrail, it can be 4.5, but everything else needs to not whack people in the head, basically. And same thing like with signs or anything within that pedestrian access route. Ramps. So the running slope, 8.3% maximum. Cross slope, just like a sidewalk, 2.1% maximum. Clear width of 48 inches minimum, including the width between the handrails. The rise, the height is 30 inches maximum, 2.5 feet. And then you have a landing. That's at least as wide as the widest ramp run leading to the landing, and at least 60 inches minimum. If you're going to change direction, and like this is indicating, that landing is 60 by 60 then. Again, might as well just make the whole thing 5 feet wide. But again, surfaces the same, sturdy, stable. I don't remember what the other one was. But anyway, same as sidewalks, pedestrian access routes. Handrails, any ramp with a rise greater than 6 inches. So basically anything that is not allowed to be beveled, like we talked earlier, has to have a handrail. And it needs to have an edge protection. 12 inches minimum beyond the inside face of a handrail, a curb or barrier that's at least 4 inches high, or a barrier that prevents the passage of a 4-inch diameter sphere shall be provided. Handrails, the height, 34 inches maximum, 34 inches minimum, 38 inches maximum, and a consistent height. Clearance between the handrail and the adjacent surface shall be at least 1.5 inches. Now, here's some resources, though. Some of these, I'm not, yeah. Anyway, there's some resources. Any questions, any comments, any struggles that you've had, any successes that you've had that you'd like to share with others? What do you think? Are these is this a challenge for you? I mean, I think all local public agencies are supposed to have a transition plan for many years now. Hopefully you all have one. If you have questions about that, we can talk about that. I'm open for discussion. This is the roundtable part.
I guess, Nell, I'll ask real quick if you feel like there's any local agencies that seem to be ahead of the curve, or at least trying to stay up with the curve on implementing PROAG. Any other guidance maybe you can suggest as resources as we're trying to make sure, right, facilities get compliant the best we can?
I mean, I think there's a lot of agencies are trying to stay ahead of the curve. I think it's difficult when the curve sometimes changes. You think you know what they were going to do, and then it changes a little bit. I don't know that there's anybody who is 100% compliant. We've been doing, LTAP has contracted with KDOT to provide training for pedestrian and bicyclist or vulnerable road user road safety assessments. We're doing 8 of those a year for 3 years. We started this spring. We'll have 2 more years of that. But when we were looking for locations to hold these classes, like, well, we need to find some place that would be helpful to look at what is needed. Well, we realized there is no place that doesn't have some things that could be improved. So I think that's the benefit of the transition plan, is to have something that you're constantly working on to get to the real accessible point. I think the good news is that PROAG has been finalized. I don't think they're planning to change anything anytime soon. So I think that makes it easier for people to comply. But I don't know that I would say anybody is there yet. So the good news is there's lots of people that could use your help How's that?
Yeah, that's interesting. That was a follow-up question I had, is if you've come across anybody who has actually, I guess, put themselves out there as an expert and will review, right, plans or projects for compliance.
I have not. No.
Not a surprise yet.
Yeah.
Okay, but I was curious.
Trying to think. Somebody gave a presentation at um, the Kansas Association for Uniform Traffic Control. To be honest, I don't even remember who that was. I don't think that whoever it was really even putting themselves out there as an expert either. They were just trying to share information, just kind of like what I am today.
That might have been Brian Geiger with City of Overland Park. I think he gave a presentation on some
Yeah.
PROWAG updates.
Yeah, I think I thought I'd heard from a consultant too at some point, but I think you're right. I think Brian did give that presentation. So, I mean, again, they're working on it, but I don't know that, and they're probably, I would say, ahead of the curve, but I don't think they're there yet either. I will say our next roundabout webinar will be Friday, December 13th. Friday the 13th, it happens at 11 o'clock. I believe at our last roundabout, we talked about there was interest in concrete as a topic. We were then talking about pipes. So there was a lot of interest in concrete. I kind of wanted to not to be quite so technical. I mean, obviously this is technical, not so much materials, I guess, for this one. So we put off concrete to December 13th, but that will be our next topic. Since we have a little bit of time left, I would say if you have other ideas for topics, feel free to share right now or email me. My email address is just nelda.buckley@ku.edu. So just trying to plan ahead, but in December we'll talk about concrete.
Thanks, Nelda.
Want to thank everybody for joining today, and hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you.